Un saluto a tutti e bentornati alla quarta stagione, quarto episodio di ROARcast, il podcast italiano dedicato ai Cincinnati Bengals. Anche questo episodio è in collaborazione con Adult Magazine. Nella scorsa puntata avete potuto ascoltare la voce di Mauro Rizzotto, esperto Dolphins, che ha avuto una bellissima conversazione con i nostri fedelissimi Giorgio, Raffaele e Gianni, mentre per questa puntata ci sposteremo a parlare più del draft, perché ormai mancano meno di 2 settimane all'evento che si terrà a Green Bay tra il 24 e il 26 aprile, e con noi questa sera ci sono 2 ospiti speciali, 2 ospiti da oltreoceano, oltre ovviamente al fedelissimo Mattia, il nostro linebacker di fiducia. Ciao Mattia.
Ciao Udey.
E con noi questa sera ci sono Andrew e Ryan di Gridiron Grading, e passeremo in inglese per presentarli brevissimo. So, hello Andrew, hello Ryan, how are you?
Great to be here.
Hi.
Good to meet you. I'm really excited.
Yeah, we're happy to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it's an honor for us to have your opinion about all it will happen in the next few weeks. We are all waiting for the draft in less than 2 weeks. And so you are the expert for the draft, and we have a lot of questions for you. Mattia, what is your first question?
Okay, the first question is, how surprised were you to be contacted by Italian for a podcast about the Bengals?
Honestly, we weren't overly surprised. Andrew being from the US, myself being from Canada, we sort of have an understanding that the Bengals fan base is pretty strong internationally, despite the fact that the team refuses to invest anywhere outside of Ohio. We've also been fans of yours for a long time now. We've been seeing you on X, formerly Twitter, for a super long time as involved members of the Bengals community. And we're just super excited to come together with the two of you to talk about the Bengals and to talk a little bit more about the draft.
Yeah, but before starting talking about the draft and all the prospects, tell us more about what you do and why do you love the draft so much and this period of the year in particular?
I think with that, why do we love the draft? It's hope specifically. I think that's one way to describe the draft. So Ryan and I are Bengals fans, have been Bengals fans our whole lives. And the Bengals, they had some rough patches. I think the fan base knows that, where every year you're sitting around waiting for the draft, and specifically the Bengals, we see that play out a lot when they're not spending a lot of money. You have to rely on the draft to find your players, the next level of talent. And I think it's one of the most exciting times of the year for every fan base. We see it now that we're doing NFL draft stuff that goes outside of the Bengals fan base. Every fan base is so excited. And so I think that gets us excited as well. And we really wanted to dig a little bit deeper because every year you're getting excited about these players, but it is neat to have a better understanding of the players you're picking and who are the right ones. How can you as a fan feel confident in those players that are coming in, have your own evaluations? And so Ryan and I were former American football players. We went to college together. And so we wanted to take some of that expertise and some of our knowledge around data, and we just started applying it to the NFL draft. And we're now in year 5 of doing this. And every year it feels like we're learning more and more about the draft and what translates and how we can pass some of that knowledge on. And so it's been really exciting to just, increase our skills in this process, bring in new data. There's always new data coming out every year that we have access to. And now having the chance to share it with NFL fan bases, the Bengals fan base specifically, we found is really excited about the draft. So that's kind of how we got into this, why we're excited about it, and kind of what we do.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us, and let our listeners know where they can find you.
Yeah, so we're on X, specifically at Gridiron Grading. Nowhere else at the moment. We've started doing a little bit more video content, but no YouTube or anything like that. So all of our content will be on X for the time being.
Great. So at the end, were you satisfied with the Bengals free agency or not that much?
Yeah, I think Andrew and I both agree that the free agency period from a Bengals perspective was incredibly underwhelming, and it feels like the team is spending the same amount of money as it did last year, if not even a little bit more, for a roster that is 95% identical to what they put on the field last year. And I think they came away with a 9-8 record. So yeah, pretty disappointing. I mean, when you look at the players they brought in, it feels like a one-for-one replacement of all of the players they lost. So Sheldon Rankins is going back to Houston, and you bring in TJ Slayton. Kappa is going to Las Vegas, you bring in Lucas Patrick. ADG is gone, but you bring in Oren Burks, and then Khalil Herbert's out there, but instead you replace him with Samaje Perine. And I guess in a vacuum, those are good depth players, maybe someone that's going to be your fourth interior defensive lineman or your seventh or eighth offensive lineman in the case of Slayton or Patrick. But with the way this roster is shaping up, those are players that the team is going to have to rely on for most likely significant snap contributions. And I think it's, like we said before, underwhelming and disappointing to the point where those are all still positions in our minds that are holes on this roster. The team, for whatever reason, doesn't think that they need to go out into the free agency world and pay more money to sign players that are better and can elevate the floor and the ceiling of this team. So I think when you look ahead to the draft, there's going to be a lot of holes that the team has to fill. And it doesn't really feel great compared to last year. I think, yeah, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks to see how they can improve the roster because free agency really didn't do too much to help that.
Yeah, at least last year there was the Geno Stoss signing that on paper was great. At the end, the outcome was quite terrible, I would say. But at least there was that one. This year, maybe we have the relief of being able to sign T. Higgins and nothing else, I would say.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think the T. Higgins signing was a big one. They had to do that. But even then, it's still kind of neutral with where they were at last year.
Yes, and it was in a position where we were not needing specifically really high-level talent, where we still have some needs, very high needs for starters.
Yeah.
In many other positions, yeah.
And I think one of the biggest thing for Andrew and myself is that hindsight's always 2020. But when you look at some of the players that we were very high on and the contracts they signed, it's not as if a team like Cincinnati could not afford them or could not pay them enough to have them on their roster. Tevin Jenkins, for example, signs in Cleveland for just under $3.25 million. And obviously, we're not in those rooms or having those conversations. So we don't know if there's necessarily an injury situation going on with him. But that was someone we were incredibly high on and the team could have paid for. Milton Williams obviously signed a very significant contract. But again, that's another player that the Bengals perhaps should have been on. Maybe a Bobby Brown III on the interior defensive line as well, to where you can sign 1, 2, or 3 of those players and still have the same amount of money the team has left over. So I guess the best word is it's confusing. We don't really know what the direction of this team is and what the front office is thinking with the moves that they've made.
Yeah, we don't know if they are not even trying or they are trying and people don't want to come, but it's unlikely since the quarterback we have. So it was more common in the previous eras, but now it's quite weird that you cannot even sign a guard, for example, at a reasonable price. Even because the guards are really difficult to draft, in my opinion. But yeah, we will talk about the draft soon. Mattia, do you have some specific question for that?
Yeah, I have a question about the hole in our roster, and what need do you think we have about the hole? Guards, something else?
Yeah, I think as we think about kind of what Ryan was talking about, you have a lot of holes on the roster left that weren't filled in free agency. And for us, as we look at it, we think the needs of the Bengals, specifically at the premium positions, we'll call it, in the trenches and pass rushing, lines up a lot with the strengths of the draft. So I think one area you think of is guards, and you mentioned it there, Matea. They need guards that can pass block specifically, and so that's a big one that stands out to us. And they probably need to be picking a guard in the first 2 rounds. And so they have pick 17 and 49 right now, assuming they don't trade. I would expect one of those picks to be a guard, whether that's a college player who played tackle that's going to move inside to guard, or a pure guard. I would expect that to be a need that gets filled right away. They also need pass rush. And like Ryan kind of mentioned, not sure if the team sees it as a need, but right now the pass rush looks worse than it was last year. And so as we look at it specifically from our viewpoint, finding a pass rusher, whether that's at defensive tackle or in the edge room, we also see as a huge need. And then you can get to some needs kind of more in non-premium positions. So a running back, they could really use some running back depth there. Can't have Chase Brown carrying it 30 times a game. They could also use another tight end. There's 5 tight ends on the roster, but I wouldn't say any of them are really starting level type of guys. And then a linebacker. They're going to need a starting linebacker. You have Jermaine Pratt, who asked for a trade. So we don't really know what's going on with that second linebacker in the room. And so you're looking at 5 needs there. They have 6 picks, and that makes it a little bit challenging as you look at how to navigate this draft.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for me, so I would not pick any playmaker on offense. Of course, not a quarterback, but not even a running back, tight end, or wide receiver. Maybe in the whole draft, or a couple of them at most on day 3, not before, to be honest. But do you think they would be that crazy to draft Aston Jeanty, Tyler Warren, or McMillan if any one of these arrives at 17, or they will skip it?
Yeah, I think the real challenging part of that question is the state of the Bengals roster, because, for example, Ashton Jeanty is the 4th highest player on our board, and we think he's an incredible running back, someone that has potential to instantly impact any team he's playing for. But when a team enters the draft with so many needs, and a team like Cincinnati already has a super strong running back in Chase Brown, for example, even though Jeanty might be one of the highest players left on our board and on the team's board, it unfortunately just doesn't make sense to take him at that position. And Teteroa McMillan, for example, is one of the top wide receivers in this class as well. And especially for an offense that is so pass heavy, that might be enticing. Obviously, you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but there really is a question about who that 3rd wide receiver might be. A lot of fans, and ourselves included, think Mike Gesicki fits that role, and he's more of that big slot wide receiver than he is a tight end. Andrew and I are also still super high on Andre Yosevach. We think he's a very good player. But there is a world where they might want to upgrade on that position as well. It's just, I think, a difficult reality to think that any of those 3 players you mentioned, Jeanty, McMillan, or Tyler Warren, sort of find their way onto the Bengals roster at 17. And we don't expect them to last very long after that. So none of them should be available when the Bengals are back on the clock at 49. So it does feel as though Cincinnati has pigeonholed themselves into either an offensive or a defensive lineman with that first pick, despite some of the other offensive playmakers that might still be on the board.
Yeah, and also Jeanty had some link with Italy. He has lived in Italy for some years. I don't remember how many. And also he is Boise State is my favorite team in college football, but still knowing that,
he kind of runs like a Ferrari out there on the field. So
yeah, it's incredible to see him running. I would really want to see if it's the same on an NFL field, but he is a great player, no doubt. And I was in love with Jahmyr Gibbs when he was going to be drafted. But to be honest, this year we have so many holes with respect to that year that we cannot afford to waste, in my opinion, a pick on Genti. And to draft a wide receiver in round 1 means that Barton project is over before starting. So I don't think they will do it anyway.
No, I can't see that really happening at all. I think you mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs, and the Lions, when they went into that draft, they were just trying to fill out very specific needs on their roster. They had 1 or 2. And so they had the freedom really to say, hey, we don't need linemen. We've signed them in free agency. They had drafted them before and done a good job. So they had the flexibility to pick, again, going back to those non-premium positions. They picked Gibbs in the first round, Jack Campbell, who's a starting linebacker for them in the first round, and then Sam Laporta at tight end. The Bengals, they do have needs at all of those positions, but they have bigger needs at those premium positions. And so to Ryan's point, I don't think there's any universe where they're, even though we have Ashton Genti as our 4th best player in this draft, they don't have the flexibility to make that pick in round 1 if he were to fall, because there's nobody to start at guard and they don't have a pass rusher on defense.
Yeah, it would be crazy. And Jahmyr Gibbs is way more important for the type of playbook than it is a running back for us. So no doubt.
Okay. We are in the draft week, and you guys are in the war room. Which players would you like to see in Bengal jersey if they were available during our picks? At the 17, you select who? I select Campbell if available.
We would definitely select Will Campbell if available too. I think. Go ahead.
I love him.
Yeah,
he's great. There could be 2 Campbells there. Jihad Campbell or Will Campbell?
No, yeah. Jihad Campbell.
Jihad Campbell.
Linebacker,
okay.
Jihad Campbell.
Mattia is a former linebacker, so
that one, he's definitely on our short list of players that could be worth that pick. I think you think about linebackers, Jihad Campbell has the potential to be a game-changing linebacker. So I think he's one. But I think Ryan and I are in agreement here. Ryan, you let me know if not. Our number 1 target for the Bengals that I think should go in the 17 pick range is Kelvin Banks Jr. He was a left tackle at Texas, but very likely he moves inside to guard in the NFL, and he's the best pass blocker in the entire draft. So as you think about what the Bengals need and what he's good at, it makes a whole lot of sense. He's also one of the younger players in the draft. He started all 3 years at Texas, including as a true freshman. And so if you were to make that pick, he would come in, probably be your left guard starting on day 1. So I think that would be the pick. If with no information right now. Other guys that could come to mind here, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, a defensive tackle, and then a few edge rushers that could come in and be that number 2 pass rusher next to Trey Hendrickson. That could be Mike Green from Marshall or James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee as well, who's falling a little bit, but we still think is worthy talent-wise of that 17th pick. But I don't know, Ryan, if you have any other names to add there.
No, I think that's a good list of players. And the common theme among all of them is that they're players in the trenches. And Andrew and I recently put out a graphic on our X page looking at which position groups in the upcoming draft were the strongest. And those top 3 were offensive tackles, edge players, and interior defensive linemen. So as frustrating as it might be to go into the draft, with so many needs on the offensive and defensive line, this is the type of draft where a Kelvin Banks Jr., like Andrew mentioned, could very well be available at 17. And in our opinion, that would be a home run pick. So I think as far as who the Bengals might take with that first selection, yeah, the 5 or 6 names that Andrew mentioned, including Jihad Campbell that Mattia mentioned as well, is a really good list of players. And we're confident that at least one of them is going to be there. So hopefully it's not too difficult for the Bengals to make the right pick like they did last year with Amarius Mims.
You know, guys, I have a sheet in front of me, and Calvin Banks is my first option because probably he will be there at 17. And I agree with you. And in particular, after your video you posted yesterday, actually, I encourage all our listeners to look at your video you posted yesterday. Walter Nolan is my second pick. But to be honest, I don't know if it's worth it, the 17th overall. Maybe for him, I would go and trade down a few picks just to have, just to be sure not to waste a 17th pick. My dream would be to go down a little bit during round 1 and go up a little bit during round 2. It's not that easy, I know, but would you bite or not?
I think value-wise, Walter Nolan at 17 could feel a little bit rich, but my issue, and I think Ryan and I have talked about this in this draft, is that we are not expecting a lot of teams to be interested in trading up. And so that's where it becomes challenging. I think if they were sitting there at 17 and Walter Nolan was on the board and they liked him, I think it might be hard to find a team that's willing to trade up unless somebody's coming up for a quarterback, or Tetero and McMillan could be a guy that a team comes up for as well. But I think that'll be the challenge, is trading back might be hard because they're going to need somebody that wants to trade up. So I agree with you on that point that Walter Nolan maybe isn't worth the value at 17, but I think if they liked him there and he was on the board, they might struggle to find a trading partner to move back with, especially in this class.
Yeah, I think with how many strong offensive and defensive linemen there are in this class, Emma, like you mentioned before, one of the scenarios where a trade down could potentially happen is if any of those really good offensive playmakers are available for whatever reason. So if Genty, if McMillan, or if Warren are available at 17, and there's a team drafting in the mid-20s, let's say, that is absolutely desperate for some offense on their roster, that maybe makes it easier. But then if those 3 players and other ones, like perhaps a Luther Burden, for example, get drafted before 17, it's going to be difficult to find someone willing to trade up when they can just stand pat at their selection and find an equally strong offensive or defensive lineman. So in theory, we love the trade back. The team could definitely use some extra picks. But like you pointed out before, it's a little bit difficult to actually make happen. So we're going to have to wait and see for that one on draft night.
Yeah, maybe for Jihad Campbell, maybe someone wants to reach, maybe. It seems like a fancy pick to me, so maybe someone can bite.
Yeah, in the case we make a trade down, and if you were against some extra picks, in which position would you use them?
I think in the world where there's a trade down, you would be looking to add especially if you're trading down in round 1, which I think would be awesome if they could make that happen. You're probably adding a pick in round 3, round 4, round 5. And then that's where you could start seeing these non-premium positions that we've talked about. So finding a running back or picking another tight end, or in the world where they might pick 2 linebackers in this class, I think that's the positions I would look to add, because I'm thinking that they're probably going into this draft. They've already set aside a certain amount of picks for these positions that are their needs. And so when they're adding extra picks, it could go to adding some extra skill position players that we've talked about. I could also very easily see a wide receiver being selected on day 3, and a trade down would give them an extra pick to make that happen.
Yeah, and go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ryan. Sure.
One position that we haven't mentioned yet that I think is also under the radar for this team is the safety position.
I was saying the same. I was going to say the same.
We're on the same wavelength. At the very, very top of the draft, Andrew and I both agree there's not necessarily a player that we would even consider at 17 for the safety position. But as soon as you get to 49, if you're looking for someone that's more of a true free safety that can play the ball well, Notre Dame's Xavier Watts is someone that's been linked to the team, especially with Al Golden returning for his new stint as defensive coordinator. But someone that Andrew and I are incredibly excited about is Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State. And he's an incredibly strong tackler. He gets involved in both the pass and the run games. And if you get that extra pick in the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th round, wherever that might come, it gives the team the freedom to open up the draft board a little bit more and target those positions that are in premium in the same way that Andrew mentioned Detroit did that a couple years ago when they took Brian Branch, for example. So if a trade down happens, I definitely think, like Andrew mentioned, you can see a lot of those non-traditional positions becoming favorable for the team.
Yeah, that would
About
be
the
great.
safety, I like a lot Mukuba in the 3rd or 4th round if he is available.
Yeah, I think he's gonna have a 4th round grade for us. So Andrew Mukuba's interesting. I think he tested athletically. It wasn't great. His short shuttle specifically, which is something we look at for safeties, was pretty bad. The one thing about him, though, that is exciting is he was a ball hawk. He was around the ball a ton. He had 5 interceptions his last season at Texas. But I think because of the size, because of the athleticism, he might be available in round 4. I think that's the range that we would make a pick on a guy like Mukuba. But looking at the first 3 rounds, there's only 4 or 5 safeties in this class that we think are worth that pick. And I would say Mukuba falls right outside of that range, just because I'd be a little bit worried about that athleticism translating to the next level.
And Emanuari and Starks, many mock drafts give them to us at the 17. Do you think it's too early?
Malachi Starks, we would not pick in that range. He is one of the guys we're much lower on than the NFL draft community or any of the scouts out there. Malachi Starks was another guy who he didn't test very well, which for safeties doesn't always matter the most. But if you're taking a guy round 1 at that position, you want them to be an elite athlete. Starks also, his production profile in college, which is something we really value, was pretty poor. He wasn't great around the ball specifically, and also wasn't making a ton of plays in the backfield either. I think a lot of the stuff that people like about Starks is stuff that the data we don't have access to. A lot of the intangible stuff in terms of being a team leader, a captain for Georgia, which is hard to quantify. So we would struggle at pick 17 to make that pick, although I do expect he goes in round 1. Nick Eamon-Wari, I think, would be interesting at 17. I think it's a little high, but we'll be more excited about that pick at 17 than we would Starks.
To be honest, with the needs we have in the trenches, I would be really surprised for taking a safety at 17. But you never know.
A lot like running back there, I think. That would be hard.
Yeah. Yes. But Emanuari reminds me a little bit of George Iloka, maybe because it's really high and really tall. But
yeah,
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if he can play good. Some videotapes are not good about him. Some others are really good. So it's really difficult to evaluate as safety, I think.
Yeah, and he's a guy who plays in the box a lot, so a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. So if they picked a guy like Nick Eamon-Wari, they could use him, I think, as a linebacker as well, which you could be filling 2 needs in 1 with him. I think he allows for a lot of creativity that Malachi Starks might not.
Oh, that's a good point. Like a lighter package. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and guys, all the times we talk about the next draft, and it's really rare we talk about the previous draft. But in the last years, what was your major disappointing pick by the Bengals and in the league?
Billy
So-
Price. Billy Price.
Yeah, Billy Price definitely comes to mind. I think you're going back to the mid or early 2010s for that one. And we all know the story of how Frank Ragnow was picked right before him, and the team sort of got spooked a little bit and felt as though they had to take a center. But Andrew and I have really been diving into the NFL draft for the past 5 years. And being perfectly honest, we haven't been the biggest fans of what the Bengals have done in the draft, outside of those picks that we would consider either super easy or no doubt home runs. So guys like Joe Burrow at 1st overall, Jamar Chase 5th overall, last year Amarius Mims at 18th. And those are definitely highlights for the team. But when you look down the rest of the list and you see how we've sort of graded those drafted players and the value, there isn't much that stands out to the point where we could be super disappointed. One name that does come to mind, at least for me, and Andrew might be able to add another one, but it's Dax Hill. And we had a 79 grade on him in 2022. So that's a solid second rounder. By no means was he a bad player in college. I think there was definitely a lot to be excited about, especially because he's a really strong athlete. But the biggest issue has been how the team has used him. They've been sort of moving him all over the place between safety and boundary corner. But when he was in college, he had 906 snaps as the slot corner. And obviously Mike Hilton has been on the team and has done well in that role. But it's difficult and it's frustrating when you select a player in the first round and then try to use them in a position that's not their natural fit or not the most comfortable. So I do think Dax Hill has a lot of growing to do, and it wasn't my favorite pick at the time. But the reason why I'm disappointed is because there was a clear path for how to use him as a slot corner, and the team just for whatever reason decided not to do that.
I'll add on to that one, Ryan, because I think in the same vein, Miles Murphy fits the category of drafting a guy without a real plan. Miles Murphy, coming out of college, he was an incredible athlete. He was very young, but he didn't produce in college. And so the story with him was always going to be they needed to get him on the field. They needed to give him room to play. And they haven't done that. So now we're going into year 3 of him, and we still don't know what he has in the tool bag. And he had no sacks last year. And Ryan and I posted a tweet a few months ago that the history for second-year edge rushers that had no sacks in their second year is pretty bad. And so we're worried about that pick and think that he needed to be on the field a whole lot more. So those are 2 at the top of the draft, but then you get into some of the defensive tackles they've taken the last few years. I think Tyler Shelvin is one that he bombed out of the NFL within a year, and they picked him pretty early. Zach Carter out of Florida a few years ago was another one. And both of those guys at the time, Ryan and I looked at each other and in our grading process had them 3 rounds lower than where they were picked. And they never really had a chance at NFL success. So now we're sitting here years later and we still don't have that defensive tackle. And that's because those draft picks were such big misses. And so that's challenging, especially when you know going in that college profile has a little chance of success. So I think there's been a lot of picks that have left them at the point where you wish they would have filled some of these gaps in free agency, and now we're relying on another draft class here.
Yeah, it's really like they really drafted the best player available, but without a plan to develop them. In both cases, in particular Dax, yes, it's so crazy to think that you take a Swiss Army knife and you put it at free safety and fitting the shoes of Jesse Bates, and you hope everything goes well. Well, it doesn't work like that. Yeah.
Okay. After destroying our last draft, who has positively surprised you compared to your pre-draft evaluation?
I have a positive. I think Cordell Volson is a guy that we weren't super high on going into the draft, and I think we've since revisited some of this stuff, and Cordell Volson now grades out a little higher than he did when they picked him, but he was a 4th-round pick at guard, transitioning from tackle from a smaller school at North Dakota State, and they've gotten 3 years of starter level play out of him, albeit not high quality starter play, but his play level for a day 3 pick and being a starter has been, I think, a really positive surprise. And then Andre Yoshivas is another one that they've gotten a lot of value out of. We had a 3rd-round grade on him in 2023, and to find a slot receiver who looks like he's going to be a starter again for them this year, I think that's a big positive. That's a win if you can find a starter on day 3. Chase Brown is another one that fits that category of positive surprises when you look at the place they were picked, some of our pre-draft evaluations, and what the Bengals have been able to get out of them.
I'm so happy.
I have a
Andrew.
question about Volson. He play right tackle in college, right?
Yeah.
Why we use him left guard?
It was his athleticism. He was, a lot of times with these guys, they can hide some of the athletic worries in college, especially if they're playing at a lower level of competition, which Cordell Volson was. But once they get to the NFL, all of those challenges that they have, the red flags in their profile, we call them, they'll get exposed a little bit more. So by putting him inside at guard, they could hide some of that. And even still, it still shows up with some of those athletic concerns. But I think they've gotten probably the most you can get out of a right tackle from North Dakota State that wasn't a particularly strong athlete picked on day 3.
Andrew, I'm so happy of your answer, because I personally like Volson. Mattia hates Volson, so for me, he's a good 5th man if the other 4 are good enough. He can be a good 6th man because he is even quite versatile. He does not make huge mistakes, so he can stay on the roster and be a really trustful backup if you want. But Mattia doesn't like him, so we always fight about that.
Yeah, I think Andrew and I typically agree with your outlook on the situation, to where if Cordell Volson is your 6th or 7th offensive lineman, that's a very good player to have. He provides depth at all offensive line positions except center, because he played those 4 positions in college. He's someone that now has a lot of NFL experience and in a pinch can come in if needed. But he's not someone that we're overly comfortable relying on to go out there and play 17 games every season. So if the Bengals can, either in free agency or this upcoming draft, find an upgrade and still keep Volson on the roster because he's not overly expensive, I think that's a big win for this offensive line. But it gets a bit tricky if you have to rely on him not only for this season, but then if you look to sign him for a second contract at a much higher value, then it gets even more challenging trying to match the value to the player. And we'd probably be looking to move on from that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't think they will need a lot of money for signing Volson again. But of course, yeah, you will think about that for sure. The opposite is about Cody Ford. I don't like him, and Mattia really likes him. So these are our.
No, I think he's a solid backup. He play
Volson, you mean?
left. No. I mean Ford, because he play left tackle and left guard. Better on left guard than tackle, but he play both.
We'll see this year. We'll see. I'm not.
I think they're pretty comparable players, Cordell Volson and Cody Ford. It's just we've been biased to view Cordell Volson as a starter and Cody Ford as a rotational backup. So if you view Volson the same way you view Ford, which is a 6th or 7th man, I think it changes a little bit how you think of him.
Yes. So thank you guys so much for your time.
Last question.
Let's go.
When your draft board coming out?
It's a good question. It's going to be coming out in the next few days. I think Ryan and I are going to talk about it after we get off of here, but expecting it'll be out probably Tuesday or Wednesday. I would say Wednesday right now. So it'll be the 16th. Hopefully give people a week to get familiar with it, get comfortable with it. But we've added a lot of new twists to it this year that I think are going to make it more user-friendly and easy to work with.
So Mattia, be ready to retweet it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Mattia?
I like a lot your works.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. We really like numbers.
Oh, no, thank you. We appreciate the support. And like we said at the start, we really appreciate you having us on to talk a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. And actually, for our listeners and also for Mattia, we were all at the Raiders game last year. Both Andrew and Ryan were there. So maybe next time we will meet together and have a drink after a win.
We should do that. Yeah, we'll have to link up. I think it's fun now that we've gotten a little bit more ingrained in the Bengals fan base on Twitter, and we got to meet up with some of the people we gotten to know over Twitter last year when we went to the game. So yeah, hopefully we can make that work. That would be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to add? Any future plans or side secrets you want to unveil?
I don't think so. Let's hope that this is a good draft class. I think it's really important for them to make strong picks this year that can come in and play right away. So I think we'll all have our fingers crossed. And every year, I think the fan base gets sharper, smarter, that we can evaluate some of these picks right away. So let's hope that there's excitement on Twitter next, 2 weeks from now when the draft rolls around.
Okay. So our next episode will be probably a mock draft in a week or so. And so, guys, Andrew, Ryan, Mattia, thanks again for joining me for this episode. And hooday.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.